Okay,
Hello,
brilliant.
everybody. Welcome. This is a joint CIPR Crisis Communications Network and CIPR ESG Network event. So, welcome to you all. I'm sure I will recognise some faces, but there'll be lots of people I don't know as well, which is wonderful. My name's Chris Tucker. I'm the co-chair of the Crisis Communications Network, and I'm joined by Susie Giles, who is the chair of the ESG network. Hi, Sue, do you want to say a little bit about the network?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Welcome everybody. I've just realised my my camera says CIPR, but I am Susie Giles. So yeah, I co-chaired the ESG Communications Network, which did start out as a panel, and then we recently converted it to a network because we wanted to get more people involved and more members. So we run events like this on different topics. This is probably the second time we've collaborated with the Crisis Network because, funnily enough, so much of what we do in sustainability comms overlaps with a little bit of crisis, just
Yes,
to keep us all on our toes.
yes,
So,
especially today, I think.
exactly. Yeah, really, really interesting topic. So pleased to have our panel today, who we will introduce in a moment.
Yeah, I'm just going to do a few housekeeping. Well, just to come back to actually what Susie was saying, I think we really are on the button with this event. In fact, there was a piece in the Times only yesterday that Emily sent round to us all. In terms of recent reports, apparently I've seen reports saying about 60 data centres submitted planning applications last year. So that's going to be pretty busy, and some of them are absolutely huge. Just one in the north of England I've read is forecast to require the energy equivalent of 3 million homes and use around 40 million litres of water a day. Now, that's what I've read, this is what's being reported, but we have the experts with us today to tell us what the actual figures are, so thank you very much for that. So, before we begin on housekeeping, as you probably noticed, we're in Zoom webinars, which means that only the panelists have mics and cameras. But we do hope that you will comment as we go along, and we hope that you will raise questions. So first of all, just go to the little lozenge where it says to and tick everyone. That is the chat box. So if you tick everyone for the chat box, when you make a comment, everyone can see what you're saying. And if we're responding to it, everyone will know what it is we're responding to. So please do that. If you have a question, and we really hope you do, you really do have an amazing panel of experts on this topic with us today. Do go to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If by any chance you can't see it, just look for the little circle with the three dots. Put your question in there, and we will get to that at the end of the event after each of our speakers has said a few words about their area of expertise. So do enjoy, put your comments, say hi in the chat box, be nice to know who's on the line and where you're from. And I'm going to hand back to Susie now, who's going to introduce our panel.
Lovely. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So today we've got three experts and coming from quite different perspectives and different sets of experiences, which is great. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Esther Calavia Garcebal, who is now let me make sure I get you've got the most amazing job title, Esther. Managing Director and Head of Natural Catastrophe and Risk Financing at Willis Towers Watson's Climate Practice. Is that correct? Excellent, jolly good. So, Esther is based in London. She works with companies to identify and manage climate related risk. And you were originally a civil engineer, is that correct, Esther?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Yes. Work as a civil engineer and then move into insurance.
Excellent. Interesting. Cool. So thank you for joining us. Secondly, we have Emily Luscombe, who is a partner and the EMEA agency lead at ERM. ERM, I'm sure many of you know, Environmental Resources Management. So they are the world's largest sustainability consultancy and now have a communications agency operating within the company where Emily is leading the team. So Emily has 25 years of experience in corporate PR, and Emily and her team work with corporate clients and advise them on how to mitigate risk and unlock value from their sustainability initiatives through excellent strategic communications. So welcome, Emily, and thank you so much for joining us. And then last but not least, Harriet Kingaby, who is the co-founder and co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network that many of you may know, which has more than 200 members, I think now, Harriet. Yeah, excellent. So, Harriet, many of you will know for her work on climate change, misinformation, disinformation, human rights, and greenwashing. So, welcome, Harriet, and thanks for joining us. So, I'm going to hand over to Chris, who is going to introduce each of our speakers, and then we will be asking some questions of them. And hello, everybody in the chat.
Hi, thank you very much, Susie. Well, I think we're going to start with Esther. Each of our panellists is going to take us through a little bit about what they see as being the issues, and obviously, as Susie said, they are all from different disciplines, but we coalesce around this particular theme of AI data centres and sustainability. So Esther, let's hand over to you to say some words about your area.
Thanks, Grace. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Excellent. Thanks, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to start talking about what the challenges that data centers are facing from an environmental and climate change perspective. So when we talk about data centers today, in particular AI driven data centers, we're really talking about critical digital infrastructure, because they really depend, they're physical assets, that they heavily depend on natural resources and the natural environment around them. But what has changed in the last few years is the scale and the intensity of that reliance, because of AI workloads. Talking about AI, they are far more energy dense, they produce more heat, and in many cases, they require significant more energy and water for cooling. All these increased heat and temperature. So at the same time, climate change is putting increased pressure and stress on the same resources that these facilities depend on. So from my perspective, there are three big environmental challenges shaping the risk of data centers right now at the moment. So the first one is energy. AI-driven data centers, as I've mentioned, they are far more power dense than traditional facilities. We are seeing a big demand for electricity, often is concentrated within specific regions, and that creates challenges around the grid capacity, grid resilience, especially during peak demand or extreme weather. The second one is water. Water tends to be a bit less visible than energy in these discussions, but is equally important and critical. So many cooling systems, they rely on water availability and reliance but for cooling, as I highlighted, but a significant number of data centers, they're located in regions that are already experiencing this water stress, like Texas or Mexico. And so in the future, as drought become more frequent and more severe, then that dependency becomes both an operational vulnerability, but also can impact, reputational, and impact on communities that they're competing for the same resources. And the third one is local environmental impact. Data centers that they operate at big scale, as we've highlighted, we are building very big data centers, and they no longer can blend into the background, into the nature environment. And there are issues like land use, like heat rejection, construction impacts, and emergency water and diesel use for these data centers. This is more and more visible and more important. So that means higher scrutiny from regulators, from local authorities and communities, and also much greater expectations around transparency. And so how is climate change amplifying all this? Climate change just acts as a catalyst of all these challenges. I highlighted extreme heat and increased temperatures. That means that cooling loads and energy demand will just increase and will put more, more pressure. And the power systems will be under stress on these scenarios as well. Drought will affect water availability, and this can trigger restrictions or permit challenges. But also, we don't need to forget the NatCat and more acute risks like flooding and storms. There are also a significant risk for data centers and for the infrastructure that they rely on. Maybe just to give an example of how high temperatures can increase, there are both ways, but it can impact operational disruption, high temperatures, but also operational expenditure increase. High temperatures above extreme high temperatures above 50 degrees, for example, which we are going to see more and more in the future, will trigger operational failure, and maybe data centers need to shut down because of safety protocols. But also higher temperatures than average, higher than 30 degrees, that will increase the space and server cooling demand, leading to higher energy and water consumption and utility costs, and translating into a higher power usage effectiveness as well. So how are the operators and developers managing all these risks? So in response, we are seeing from data center operators that they're becoming a bit more sophisticated, not necessarily consistent across regions, but is slowly changing. The more advanced organizations, they're bringing environmental risk much earlier on into the decision making, particularly around site selection and design. And that's critical because once the data center is built, then the cost and the vulnerabilities is locked in, and it's more difficult to retrofit later on than if you do it earlier on. And we're also seeing investment in more resilient cooling technologies, water recycling, diversified power sources, battery storage, and increasingly operators are stress testing utilities and asking, how does performance look like in future climate conditions? Scenario planning and financial quantifications of these risks are becoming more and more important. Developers and operators have started looking at, closely how these chronic risks and forward-looking basis across the life cycle of the data center, and how heat and drought will impact future energy and water demand. So what does it mean in terms of business and reputation? Going back to the key point, so water use during droughts, or heavy reliance on diesel generation during heat waves can lead to reputational issues. But also on the flip side, when energy and water risks are understood early, and also they are managed and they're designed for at early stages and thoughtfully, then and communicated transparency. Again, the point of communication here is very important to developers and stakeholders. Then they become more a source of resilience and trust, not a vulnerability or reputational risk. So it builds confidence and supports investors, lenders, insurers, and also regulators.
Wow, thank you very much, Esther. You mentioned about, in fact, we've talked a lot about the resource-hungry nature of these. I mean, the UK, we're quite used to hosepipe bans, for example, in the summer. Water is an issue, and obviously energy security is a very, very hot topic. So I'm just wondering, from the point of view of the developers, how do they build this into where they're deciding to site these centres? Can these locations support the water and the energy needs that they have? How do they build that in?
That is a really good question. And historically, site selection always prioritized connectivity, proximity to population, or power availability, or land, requirements. But I think climate was treated more as a compliance, a secondary issue, or insurance issue. But this is changing, and that's something, that this mindset is changing, especially when thinking about long-term viability of sites. So climate is being factored on site selection, to consider these challenges of water and energy. So we're seeing a shift from from where can I build to where a data center can operate reliably over the next 25, 30 years. Because there are some sites that might look viable today, but they might face operational constraints or new risks in 20 years that, is good to know now before you decide where to invest. But an additional shift that we're seeing is the convergence between climate risk and sustainability constraints. Because in some regions, the challenge is no longer that whether a site can operate reliably, in a changing climate, but also whether it can secure the low carbon power and the water at all, and whether it can retain the social license to operate because of all these constraints and the community opposition and reputation. So yeah, political and regulatory risks are becoming very important for site selection. We've seen sites that have been rejected or going through disputes during planning, leading to higher costs of project cancellation. There was an example in Canada that was rejected in 2025 because the concerns and the pressure on the land use and the use of water as well, and because we're seeing this increase in summer temperatures driving this higher water use. So yeah, that's an important aspect of site selection. But also we are seeing places like Germany or the Netherlands that they starting to set binding power usage effectiveness. So yeah, this is also increases the importance of site selection to be able to meet these standards cost effectively.
Fascinating, absolutely, and I think that sort of pressure will only grow. Thank you, Esther. Emily, obviously, the AI is an opportunity for communications, as we all know, as communicators, as well as work for you picking up, I think, some of these reputational challenges that Esther has outlined. So, Emily, give us your perspective on this topic.
Thank you, Chris. Look, we in sustainability all love a bit of data, so I'm going to start with a few data points. Last year at ERM, we spoke to 6,000 adults to try and get a temperature check on attitudes towards AI and the environment. And what we found is that most people support the use of AI to better service them as customers, that less than half of people really understand the environmental impacts of use of AI or indeed of data centers. But then when we said to them, do you know that an AI online search uses 10 times as much electricity as a traditional web search? People were horrified. And more than half said, that would make me think again about how much I'm using AI, how frequently I'm going online and using that in my day-to-day job. So I think what this tells us is that the negative association between AI and data centers in this sense and the environment is really not coming through yet, because people don't quite understand what they're hearing. And therefore, I think as we start to see more and more conversation around this, there's going to be more need for myth busting, accurate information, strategic communication by these data center operators and the guardians of the AI to make sure that this is properly understood and those right decisions can be taken. What we are seeing is that in the mainstream media, there is a steady increase in coverage and conversation around data centers and the environment. We're actually seeing a 10% year-on-year increase in the UK media covering these topics together. That's since 2020. And topping it all are those really kind of staggering facts we hear about scale. I'm sure some of you saw that picture that was shared across the global media where the new Meta data center was projected onto a map of Manhattan. And that was obviously deliberately set up to provoke and kind of drive conversation, and actually also drive horror. Data center demand is expected to grow fivefold between now and 2030. So this kind of idea of scale and growth is the thing that's really capturing people's interest. And we also know that media coverage is getting more polarized. So people are getting more opinionated on this as they hear more, whether it's fact or whether it's conjecture, whether it's disinformation. They're absorbing more information, and that is driving people to start to make decisions in their behavior, and then obviously for authorities to make different decisions as a result of that. So I think from all this, we can hypothesize that as there is more information, more fact put out into the public domain, behavior will be more increasingly impacted with regards to this topic, and people in theory will probably have their decisions swayed more against data centers and use of AI. So that's the reputational challenge. However, as Chris just said, I'm an optimist, and I also like to talk about the opportunity. So I'm going to focus the next couple of minutes on sharing some of my thoughts, not on the challenges that we face as communicators, but actually the massive opportunity that I see AI presenting, particularly to those of us working in the sustainability communication space. And there I'm really going to drill into one thing, which is GEO, G-E-O. I'm sure all of you have been reading lots and lots of stuff in the media around GEO in recent months. It's a really hot topic. But putting a communications lens across it from a sustainability perspective, and particularly from a greenwashing perspective, I think is really useful for us, because there are some things that AI is doing in terms of writing the communication handbook regarding reputation management. So if we start kind of drilling into GEO and what we mean by this, this is, for those of us the old school comms world, it's kind of the new SEO, right? It's AI informed online search. And another really interesting data point for you that just baffles me is 80% of online searches that all of us are now doing are 0-click, which means we go into Copilot or Gemini, we ask a question, the AI serves up that really quick, succinct answer, and we take that away and use that in our business or in our lives. Only 20% of us go on to click through to a website or to a media source like we did in the old days of SEO, right? So that's quite scary when you think about it, because this is 80% not just of consumers maybe researching products or people researching holidays or, you know, the fastest journey time. This is also journalists, and I've spoken to journalists. They are doing this. Journalists, it's investors, it's analysts, it's anybody making decisions around businesses. Their starting point is to go in and ask the AI and be served up what appears to be an increasingly accurate answer. But I'm talking about the positives, right? So the positive here is what an opportunity for us as communicators to get on top of what is feeding the AI. Where is GEO sourcing its information from? And what GEO wants more than anything else is credible facts. This is where I get really excited, okay? So we know, and it's a bit of a wild west because the rules are changing all the time, and GEO is educating itself, and the AI is also changing its own rules of engagement. But we can see that the information, the answers that Copilot or Gemini present to an online search tend to come from credible science-based information. They draw from sustainability reports, for example. They draw from analyst reports, third-party accreditation like SBTI alignment or B Corp alignment. All those sorts of badges of credibility support your brand's presence in AI-generated search. So do expert spokespeople with opinions. So CEOs who are doing interviews, speaking with obvious gravitas, depth, understanding of the subject matter. AI really loves them. AI loves independent editorial media content. So all of this, for me, as a PR, this is brilliant, because it's a return back to that world of earned reputation, where for a while there, you could pay to play. If you put enough money behind SEO, you could get your brand out there and everybody would have their eyeballs on it. Now, actually, it's back to these rules of engagement, of earning that license to communicate, earning your reputation. Okay. Conversely, businesses that are making green claims, and I do a lot in the greenwashing space, that are not evidence-backed, that don't have a credible foundation or full of hyperbole, they are now simply being buried by the AI. So AI is making a judgment on your business long before you're called out by the critics. You're just kind of effectively cancelled from online search, which I think makes this a whole different ball game. It's looking way beyond communications now. Last year, RepRisk ran a report that showed that 4.4% of UK businesses were at risk or were accused in some shape or form of greenwashing last year. And the banking and finance sector was actually the industry most accused of this. So miscommunication around green finance, around sustainable bonds. There's a lot of issues and complaints lodged against banking and finance organisations. So we see there that greenwashing is obviously contributing to misinforming investors and the business community, and it's certainly no longer confined to a marketing issue. It's more of a growing liability. If you flip that on its head and you look at those businesses that do have an authority to comment and communicate on green claims, that are doing the right thing. I'm fortunate at ERM, most of the businesses we advise are already working with ERM on their sustainability performance, on doing the do and getting that right. And then they come to us and say, right, now we want to communicate it. So we are working from a place of science, not of spin, not of creative content, but of grounded in that evidence. So those businesses that actually can communicate on their green claims absolutely should. And the reward for doing that is no longer just some good headlines or a kind of marketing advantage. It's actually online, it's a digital face, voice that you may not have if the AI deems you not credible. So bringing that back to AI and data centers, I guess being a kind of being a force for good. If you greenwash, if you don't have that credible bedrock of communication, you're going to be disappeared. You're going to pay the ultimate penalty. If you can, and you do, you're going to be served up with far greater prominence and impact than happened in a world before AI search. So as I see AI as essentially written that rule book for communicators, right? It's set new goalposts that we all have to kick the ball between. But for those of us who are advising businesses on sustainability communication, I think this makes the strongest case yet to leadership teams of the need to invest in getting this right. And that gets me really excited.
Wow, thank you for that, Emily. I mean, as you were speaking there, and I was still reflecting also on what Esther was saying too, and there's a big stakeholder engagement piece here, isn't there? I mean, stakeholder engagement in terms of the negatives of AI, but also stakeholder engagement in terms of realising some of the opportunities that you were just talking about making sure that the right organisations know your sustainability story and feed the geo, as it were. So tell us a little bit about, this is what you're working on, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And a lot of the work we do is helping organisations translate very complex, often scientific information into something that is meaningful to those stakeholders. So I talk a lot about translating outputs into outcomes. There are a lot of outputs and metrics in sustainability, aren't there? Let's be frank. All those data points and all those framework aligned reports, it's valuable, it's fulfilling a very definite purpose, but actually it's not very decision useful. And if you can translate all that into the so what this means for me as a stakeholder, as a community stakeholder, as a customer, an employee, an investor, that translation, or that we talk about quantification of the benefits of sustainability, that basically means what is valuable to the person I'm trying to talk to, and how do I put rigor around that concept of value so people can embrace it and recognize what's in it for them.
Great, thank you, Emily. Harriet, we're already beginning to encroach on your area here. In fact, I just wanted to say, when I was doing some research for my little introduction, and I found all these wonderful data points, and then I started to think, are they true or not? And I thought, well, actually, we're going to be talking about that, aren't we? So, and I read the paper, the UN paper, Harriet, that you authored or co-authored. It was fascinating, on information integrity. So do tell us a little bit more about that perspective on AI.
Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, I think my points build on both what Esther and Emily have been talking about. So the report that the Conscious Advertising Network wrote with the United Nations was concerning actually this crossover between information integrity, which, you know, it's a bit of a buzzword, but it's basically, it means the health of our information ecosystems. And information integrity essentially looks at 5 different pillars. It's not just about the content that's out there, but it's about things like pluralistic journalism, making sure that that's kind of viable. It's about the healthy incentives that drive the production of content. And, you know, we work with advertisers around a lot of those because, you know, that's, we're related to a lot of that. It's things like societal trust and resilience, which, as we know as communications professionals, is absolutely vital. Whether you work in advertising or crisis comms, you know, trust in the messaging you're putting out, in the spokespeople you're working with, is, you know, has a huge impact on how effective those communications are. So all of this, and for those of you in the sustainability world as well, this is a really, really important thing to get your head around, because if you're dealing with issues such as climate change, dealing with issues such as human rights or impacts on your own reputation, actually, making sure that you're abreast of actually how you as a corporate entity can continue, how can do business in ways which impacts this is really important. And so the United Nations came to us and they wanted to understand better how kind of embedding AI into our systems and processes and the way that we're monetizing it through advertising could impact information integrity. And so what we did is we ran an analysis across those five different pillars, and we came up with 5 significant risks. And I think the one that really kind of impacts data centers is this risk around infrastructure fragility. So Emily talked about this kind of no-click internet and the fact that so many of our searches now, whether you end up using the generative AI response at the top of the searches, or if you're kind of embedded within those generative AI tools and you're working with it on questions and outputs. Both of those means that we're no longer visiting websites in the same volume as we were before. So the Daily Mail Group actually released a piece of work which said that they think that kind of some visits to their sites have gone down around 89%. We've got to the point where the publishers of Rolling Stone, Penske Media, are taking Google to court over this. And essentially what that means is that there's a large amount of journalism which has no longer got a funding model. Because when we were going to these sites and visiting them, we were scrolling past adverts, and those adverts were essentially kind of providing income streams for these media outlets. And if we're no longer doing that, we're defunding journalism at a massive scale. And this is hugely problematic, because what that does is it forces more people, they often go there voluntarily, but like more and more people are accessing information through these tools, which are majority owned by a very small section of the population, based in specific geographies. And that has an impact on the kind of information that is surfaced and prioritized. And it also means that diversity of the kind of, of what we get on the open web is under threat. And when you combine that with the fact that data centers are incredibly resource intensive and they are very prone to climate risks. So we looked at reports around, kind of how flooding or extreme weather impacts data centers. And you look at the fact that they are, hugely resource intensive. And you've got a problem. And we defined it as infrastructure fragility, because you're creating a dependence on an infrastructure that's being built. And that infrastructure itself, because of financial issues, we know these organizations have borrowed huge sums of money from investors, and they need to get that investment back. You've got financial commentators describing the AI kind of like investment as a bubble. And you've got these physical factors. It's creating an infrastructure that is very, very, kind of concentrated in terms of ownership, and it's fragile. And so we really, we really think that is an area of concern. And what that does is that creates reputational challenges, because, for example, when you have, kind of low trust in some areas, so we see that the public, while, kind of, I think, often being supportive when AI directly benefits them, are also being exposed to narratives such as, what happens when our workforce shrinks? Who is thinking about that? There are concerns around, the ideological implications of the tech companies being owned and run as they are. All of these things create low trust environments. And we also have the addition of data centers that may, kind of increase bills in local areas. And, we've seen how those kind of factors with things like the 5G movement can contribute to things like conspiracy theories starting. And we know that disinformation thrives in a vacuum, which is why, I think Emily's point was so important, which is that we need to be communicating, and we need to be communicating with a variety of stakeholders very straightforwardly, and very, and informed and looking at the data around these issues, because otherwise, if stakeholders aren't being communicated with, then disinformation thrives. And I think we also, and this is a call to action, I think also from our agency colleagues, we need to get our head around what's the real stories we're here to tell, because we're already seeing examples of potential kind of success washing and purpose washing in this space. So there was a report from a group of NGOs that was fronted by Ketan Joshi, and it found that when we were communications and when AI companies were communicating around data centers and communicating around their tools, they were often around resource kind of use. They were conflating some of the technologies at stake. So they were conflating the resource use, for example, of machine learning, which is an established technology, has been around for a long time, with the resource use of generative AI. And generative AI is much more resource intensive, requires, kind of very different support networks, etc. So I think we as communicators, this is a complex issue, but we need to get our head around these things, because if we are given briefs, we need to be able to interrogate them, and we need to make sure that we've got the data points to be sure that we're not adding to some of the issues around all of this. So if I was going to wrap this up, and I would say there's 3 things we can do. Number 1, we are at a moment where AI companies, particularly if we advertise or thinking about advertising in these spaces, there is a monetization moment where in fact they need our investment. And so we have a very brief window of time to be able to ask them for better guardrails in exchange for monetization. Number 2, we as corporate entities need to be communicating with stakeholders truthfully in this space to make sure we're bringing people with us. That is so important. And number 3, I think we need, if the open web is currently fragile, and we know that we need to be thinking about information integrity very seriously, that it's going to help us in the long term in terms of our business outcomes. So we need to be thinking about what we can do to protect information integrity, invest in journalism, and credible and diverse news sources in order to make sure that kind of what's feeding the AIs of the future has a viable business model.
Wow, thank you, Harry. I was thinking it almost feels as if there's an ethical dimension to this in terms of us as communicators. I mean, do you agree that, is that part of the role that you're outlining there, that we have to do this? It's important for the future of what we do as communicators. If we don't have established sources, if journalism's been defunded, that's going to make it very difficult for us.
Absolutely. And I think ethical is definitely a framing, and that's why we need sustainability brains on all of this, because sustainability brains get the links between some of these more complex environmental and human rights issues and business. But also there's a C-suite level risk kind of element to all of this, which is that if we are not thinking about complex risks in terms of AI integration, we're going to miss things which are going to impact our business in the longer term. And anyone who's been through a whole crisis comms situation where they've been at the center of a conspiracy theory, some of our members had that during COVID, can tell you it's incredibly expensive to fix. It's incredibly difficult to get those audiences back. And it requires a lot of resource and in order to deal with it. Anyone who works in insurance, in chocolate, in coffee will tell you that if we don't fix climate change, that is an absolutely business critical thing, and we're not going to do that if we don't have trust. So I think there is this paper makes this seem a little bit more perhaps simple than than my ramblings of putting it forward as. But we do need to get better at this kind of risk assessment, because also these technologies are going to bring in unknown unknowns, like things that we just don't know. So we've got to and I think that there is room for more dialogue between NGOs and business around these issues, because we each understand different parts of the problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it sounds like we don't really have that much time. Picking up on Emily's point about almost sound like the drumbeat of mainstream media coverage, which now I'm sort of seeing. And I've had completely different conversations with people. Sometimes contacts, what is the issue? And then other times I'm surprised by how much people do know. Someone said, well, if I'm using AI to write a 100-word email, I might as well pour half a litre of water down the sink. And I'm like, whoa. So that people are getting familiar with the issue. So it sounds like we haven't got that long. Susie, your thoughts?
I'll unmute myself. Yeah. it is interesting. The thing that always comes to mind, and I hope I'm getting better at this, is when someone does put a piece of information in front of me, I just question it because I'm just so unsure whether it's accurate or not. And I think that's just making, I think that the impact of AI and all of the conversations and all of the media coverage around data centers and their impact, I think it's I think it's a real challenge. And Emily, it must be a challenge for you guys at ERM advising those clients and dealing with the different stakeholders. Is it getting more challenging in the current environment?
I think we have a trust problem, but we've had that for a while. I don't think that's new. I
Mm,
think AI is, in some respects, exacerbating that. I love that you say that, Susie, that you challenge everything that's put in front of you, but I put that 80% zero click back to you because
yeah,
maybe most people aren't. And maybe we don't trust what we're told by humans or told presented to us in the media, but maybe we haven't yet quite caught up on the fact that we can't trust AI, or nobody's asking
yeah.
the question, where's AI getting this stuff from? I think it's
Mm,
all just the goalposts are shifting so fast. I mean, look, my background is in public relations consultancy, and I've still got many friends and ex-colleagues in public relations consultancy, and I'm sure many on this call are of that world as well. I think it is more challenging for those who are in the business of creating stories and
mm,
kind of human to human communication. I think actually I probably have it easier, dare I say, at ERM because our starting point is fact. It has to be.
yeah.
It has to
Mm,
be. If we are building a decarbonisation strategy that is to enable our business to be resilient for the long term, starting at that point, what do we need to do? Do the thing, track the thing, report the thing. I mean, reporting is it's a mixed blessing for communicators, right?
mm,
There is such
mm,
a lot of information that these big listed businesses now need to report. But actually, if they are doing it and capturing it and complying, they've got that bedrock of data. Data is precious. It's so valuable, and it can be used for communication as much as it is starting from that point of fact, of
mm,
science-based content. And I think that is how we are going to gain back the trust. It is
yeah.
speaking from that position of authority.
Mm, mm, yeah. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions emerging in the chat if you want me to throw those out, Chris.
Yeah, do Susie. Yeah, there's some Q and A's. Yeah, I'll leave the
And
Q's. Now we need the A's.
Hughes, yeah. Well, thank you, Emily. You've already answered the one about content behind paywalls, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, do read Emily's response, but it's talking about how AI can crawl over content which is behind a paywall, and as you said, Emily, there's some commercial relationships being brokered with Google to make sure that AI can see their content, which is interesting. And related to the journalist question, Paul's asked, interesting to hear Harriet's point about reducing of income streams through people no longer seeing ads on news websites. Has this led to any job reductions at news outlets yet? Harriet, do you know?
Yeah, my understanding is that that is the case. So there's three places that you can go and look for evidence on this. Number one, Kandar Media, who
Mm,
publish specialist publications, put out a
mm,
piece last year, I believe, and it's covered in Media Leader, that said that actually a third of their outlets might have to close by the equivalent time this year, should we not fix this problem. There is a Penske Media have taken Google to court on this, and there is quite a lot of evidence, I believe, in that filing. And then thirdly, the Daily Mail Group have released figures. I can't tell you whether that's resulted in job losses, but there is a lot. Again, there's evidence to back that one up. And I know that, caveat is I know that the funding model for journalism has changed massively over the
mm,
last 15
mm.
years. I'm not saying this is the only problem here,
Mm,
but that it's definitely speeding up some of the trends that we've seen before.
mm. Brilliant. Thank you. Charlotte is asking, she says, I think you've all mentioned trust. As society is more and more polarized, earning and maintaining trust is difficult. Given the information and facts around data centers is emerging and we're very much in the learning stages, how do you suggest we work to build trust around this topic? Communicating uncertainty is hard, isn't it just? Anybody want to have a go at that one, Emily or Harriet or Esther?
I'm happy to jump in, Harriet, and if you
Yeah.
want to. We've probably both got a view on this. So, and I saw the next question as well from Tal, and I think it's a similar answer. So, we do a lot of work with big corporates, big infrastructure developers, be it data centers, be it renewable developers, and so on, around how to communicate through what are often very long-term development programs. And the starting two kind of rules of thumb that I always advise these these organizations. One of them is, I don't think you can over communicate on this. I think a lot of businesses are very nervous to communicate or put information out there when, as you say in your question, the outcomes are not necessarily known. There's a lot of testing and learning and working through and doing modeling. The businesses that seem to get this right are those that communicate where they are on the journey, even if they can't always communicate the end goal, and make sure that that communication is consistent and transparent, and where possible is backed by the evidence or those learning points. Obviously, PR 101 is using advocates and identifying others who are trusted within your community. If you're a new face in a community, if you're coming in and building out a big development and you haven't got those relationships, going through those trusted advocates is really, really key. Where we see some businesses fall foul is in an inconsistency between a corporate mission and vision, and we are driving the future of data centers. This is going to enable X, Y, and Z, these jobs, these impacts, and then what is felt by the local community is so at odds with that, and there is not sufficient management of the message at a local level and a corporate level. And it's back to this conversation about value and what matters to those people. So I'm sure you're already doing this, those who've asked on the chat, but actually taking time to get inside the lives and the heads of those communities who are impacted and to understand what their concerns are. Because as we've established, there's so much misinformation, there's so much stuff out there that people are processing and that is starting to inform and influence their behavior. Their concerns may not actually be directly related to your scheme or development at all. You need to get to the nub of what they currently understand, what their concerns are, and how you can align to those, how you can, in many cases through communication, put those concerns to rest, and where you can't, a kind of transparency and collaboration with the community around trying to get to some of those solves. So it's that consistency of message, which we know the AI also, back to AI, hates when you've got one corporate message and a local message that's at odds. That's where businesses are penalised. It's making sure that you're communicating on the stuff that the communities are actually exercised or concerned by taking time to listen, not just shout at them. And it's looking for those kind of points of building out trust through advocacy and transparency in that communication. That would be my starting point. Harriet?
Thanks, Emily. Harriet, do you want to add anything to that?
I think we need to also be aware of that we can learn a lot from the net zero conversation, to be honest. Like, I think there was a very clever campaign to separate concern around climate change from net zero, and that has been successful at moving public opinion. And I think that I assume that there is unlikely to be a nationwide campaign from government around the importance of data centres, frankly. And so corporates we are going to have to do all the things that Emily has said and think about how we bring people with us, because if not, then we are likely to see kind of campaigns popping up at local level, and I think that has to include kind of like listening and understanding and bringing people with us at that level, as well as that national level kind of communications. And I think there's some of these issues we cannot solve with communications alone. They are things like suspicion around job loss. They are things like overpromising of job creation, which is another kind of theme that I've observed in communications around this. Like, we really do there are some really legitimate concerns around how this infrastructure and how these technologies are going to change society. We as communicators alone don't have the answer to that. So I think we do also need to make sure that we are essentially kind of like, listening, trying to create solutions, but also, kind of talking to decision makers around what they're going to do, because this is going to require a lot more than us individually working, alone.
Could I just ask a question of Esther? I mean, Esther, the organizations that are building and developing and building these AI data centers, I mean, what's their thinking on in terms of what they can build into the design or the technologies that they use that will address some of these issues? I'm thinking renewable energy, for example. I mean, what are the kind of technical possibilities to mitigate some of these resource issues?
It's a good question, and I mean, renewable energy is is a key aspect to manage some of these risks, especially the energy one. And yes, there isn't a single number that we can say, oh yeah, how many data centers rely on renewable, because it depends by region, operator, or business model. But we're starting to see an increase in some geographies that they are setting specific targets for renewable energy. For example, in countries like Ireland, they're implementing strict regulations for new data centers to balance the grid stability and sustainability. For example, in Ireland, they will need to ensure that 80% of the energy is from new renewables within 6 years. So we are seeing this more coming, and this is early in 2026. So I think this will help manage where sites are located and how we manage these risks, around energy and water in particular, and resource management. But going back to the trust question, and I think there is a question on the chat from Tal about how we manage these risks at planning stage, and also how we manage the community reputational risk side. And I think from my perspective, the key point is early engagement across sectors, between engineering companies doing the design, between the owners and the developers, and also insurers and the organizations assessing the risks. And this is changing, but I think there's more that we need to do to make sure we collaborate, we learn from each other, we start integrating data-driven insights to communicate these risks, forward-looking climate data, to understand what's going to be my impact on water and energy risk, and what are you doing to mitigate. But we can't do it when the site is chosen and built. You have to do it really early. And that's my key message, is that's how we can manage the trust and the community engagement.
Absolutely, a huge piece of work there. I think when local communities do think more about what is actually happening in their locality, and Emily's picture that you painted of how big they are if you put them on the site on a map of Manhattan, I think people will be doing that in the UK with a lot of these developments very soon. So I think there isn't really long to get that narrative developed and communicated. I think it's a real challenge.
Yeah, and Tal makes a good comment and question on and it's similar to what you were just saying, Esther, about Ireland and what they're putting in place. So, is there a reputational challenge for UK PLC to attract the right data center? How does the UK position itself to attract data center investment, if assuming that's what it's going to do? I think it's interesting, this idea that you could look at it from a national perspective. Is there anywhere else like Ireland doing those kinds of things?
Are countries competing, as it were, for this? I'm sure that they probably are, for the investment.
Yes, not that I'm aware, but I'm sure there will be more, I think, in other jurisdictions that they will implement similar restrictions.
I think the same rules apply, whether it's on behalf of UK government or UK PLC, or whether it's individual operators. It's about transparency on the policy. It's about feeling that this is a fair playing field, and that all of us as stakeholders, and we are all stakeholders in this, because we're all going to be impacted by one of these data centers, probably pretty close to us. And think about all those poor people who live in Slough, right? Because of the way the infrastructure and the energy is set up, you will have these cohorts of data centers. You'll have many of them in one specific area, like we're seeing in Slough, where those communities are hugely impacted. So I would imagine the starting point needs to be, has a fair and just policy been applied? What are the bases on which this data center operator or this contract has been awarded? What are the mitigations that are being put in place to minimize impact? And a bit like we're seeing on big infrastructure developments like Heathrow, what are some of the requirements that are being put in place to mitigate as far as is possible the social, community, as well as the environmental impacts of those? And I feel like for data centers, we're probably not quite there, but we've actually got the precedents when you look at those big infrastructure projects like Heathrow. So I imagine that's the direction it'll go.
That's a really good point, Emily, because I was thinking about some of the public protests we saw around HS2. Going back to the 90s, I know, but I've been around long enough to kind of remember that. And fracking, of course, was another one where local communities became very engaged in these issues, in protecting, as they saw it, their local community. So I'm thinking about the role for council, public sector. We have a lot of members, don't we, Susie, who work in the the local authority area. Maybe we should be thinking about some support there, Susie, from our point of view as CIPR representatives. But Susie, do you want to sort of sum up in the last few minutes? Not easy, I know.
No, not at all. No, I think it's been great to get the different perspectives, and it is really interesting, Esther, because you work with clients in very specific areas. Emily, I know you're working with similar clients and really working on the strategic communications and that reputational risk, and then Harriet, your work around information integrity. I think it just is the case that these issues are not going to go away, but how we actually treat them and how we communicate them and how we deal with the public around this is extremely important. And it's not dissimilar, as you say, to other industries. It makes me think of the mining community and the work that we do with stakeholders all the time around those kind of projects. But there's still essential infrastructure, and it's obviously not something that's going to go away. So we have to be able to deal with it. So I think this is the beginning of a conversation, I think, that is just going to continue and develop. And I think it's fascinating. I think follow Harriet and download her latest report. And Emily, aren't you doing something at London Climate Week around this topic?
I am. Well, thank you for the plug. Yes, we are hosting an event actually at London Climate Action Week, digging into geo and AI as an opportunity and challenge for sustainability communication by corporates. And we've entitled it "AI is Judging Your Sustainability Claims. Are you ready?" So we're going to be digging into this in some more depth. I've got a few special experts speaking on the panel alongside me. So if you're interested in coming along to that, please reach out separately.
Excellent, thank you. I think maybe we should get you three back in about 6 months and then see what it all looks like then.
How much progress we've made.
Exactly. Or not.
No, I think we need to. So great that we've helped to kick the conversation off here with Europe's leading communications body in the CIPR. So thank you all so much for your time today and for all your comments and lots of food for thought there. So thank you all for joining us. There will be a recording of the event, so if you missed any of it, that will be on the CIPR's channel. And do keep in touch with the Crisis Comms Network and the ESG Network, and we'll be back with you very soon. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Susie.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you soon. Bye.